London, the 9th of May, 1853. The first shoe broke beneath Miss Edith Selwyn before the Duke of Cranmore had crossed half the length of Wrotham House's blue drawing-room. The sound was not loud. It was only a soft crack beneath the music of polite conversation, followed by the sharper scrape of a heel skidding across polished parquet. Yet every head near the central aisle turned. Edith caught herself against the edge of a display table before she fell. One hand closed around the subscription book she had been ordered to carry. The other gripped the silk-draped table so tightly that the bones showed white beneath her glove. Around her, dozens of black kid leather shoes gleamed beneath crystal light, each pair arranged with blue ribbon and a small silver crest for the ladies' convalescent shoe subscription. They looked strong enough to carry a woman through rain, illness, and winter. The pair on Edith's feet had not carried her across one room. A ripple of laughter passed through the nearest guests. It was quickly smothered beneath fans and lowered voices, but Edith heard it. She had spent too many years learning the exact sound of amusement disguised as concern. Lady Teresa Croxley stood beside the subscription table in pale blue satin, one hand resting against her pearls. "How unfortunate," she said, with the careful sympathy of a woman who had been waiting for misfortune to arrive. Edith looked down. The left sole had opened from the toe almost to the arch. The right heel had twisted inward, leaving her ankle trembling beneath her. She had warned Lady Teresa that morning. She had shown her the thin bulge along the sole and asked permission to wear her older walking shoes instead. Teresa had smiled and said the committee's own footwear ought to be seen on the committee's own assistant. Lord Victor Croxley had heard the request from behind his newspaper. A paid assistant can't interrupt a charitable exhibition because of personal discomfort, he had said. The recipients manage with less. Now Edith stood before half of fashionable London in shoes taken from the returned stock and given to her instead of 4 months of wages. She kept her face still. "The subscription book, my lady," she said, extending it toward Teresa. "I believe you wished His Grace to see the latest names." Teresa did not take it. Her gaze dropped to Edith's feet, then traveled deliberately to the women nearest them. "Poor things do have a way of making objects appear worse than they are," she observed. "One gives them something respectable, and within a week it looks fit for the gutter." A woman beside her laughed before pretending to cough. Edith felt heat climb beneath her collar. She could have answered. She could have reminded Teresa that she was not a recipient, that she had copied every letter, arranged every fitting, and visited women who could not climb the steps to Wrotham House. She could have said that the shoes had been returned because another woman had already complained of the sole. But the Duke of Cranmore had just entered, and Teresa's entire body had changed at the sight of him. Her shoulders softened, her smile warmed. The cruelty vanished so completely that anyone who had not witnessed it might have doubted it had ever existed. Edith would not give her the scene she wanted. She gathered the torn edges of her dignity as carefully as she gathered her skirt. "Excuse me," she said. No one moved to help. She crossed the few steps to the velvet screen near the south wall by placing her weight on the outer edge of her right foot. Each movement sent a hot line through her ankle. Behind the screen stood a narrow chair used by committee ladies when they tired of standing. Edith sat, angled her body away from the room, and slipped both shoes from her feet. The heel of her stocking was already reddened. She lowered her skirt over her ankles and tucked the broken shoes beneath the dark folds, as though hiding them might restore the boundary between private hardship and public entertainment. For one breath, she allowed herself to close her eyes. Then a man's voice came from the other side of the screen. Miss Selwyn. She knew the voice before she looked up. Every room changed when Christopher Darlington, Duke of Cranmore, entered it. Not because he raised his voice. He rarely needed to. He possessed the kind of authority that made other people lower theirs. Edith opened her eyes. He stood at the edge of the screen, tall in a dark morning coat, one gloved hand resting lightly against the carved wood. He did not look down. He did not glance toward the hidden shoes or the line of her covered feet. His attention remained on her face. That restraint unsettled her more than pity would have done. "Your Grace," she said. He moved no closer until she inclined her head. Then he lowered himself enough that they were nearly at eye level, careful to remain beyond the screen's shelter. "I saw everything," he said. The words struck more deeply than the laughter had. Edith's fingers tightened around the subscription book. She had wanted no one to see, yet there was no triumph in his expression, and no discomfort either. Only a grave, focused anger that did not appear to be directed at her. "Then you saw an unfortunate accident," she replied. It was the answer expected of a woman in her position. His gaze held hers. "I saw you warn Lady Teresa before you crossed the room. I saw Lord Wrotham refuse to listen. I saw the soul open. I saw Lady Teresa smile." Edith's breath stopped. Beyond the screen, conversation continued in careful fragments. No one yet knew that the most powerful man in the room had witnessed the entire cruelty they were already preparing to rename as clumsiness. Christopher's voice lowered. "May I stop this distribution?" The question was so unexpected that Edith stared at him. A duke did not ask a paid assistant for permission to halt an aristocratic committee. A duke decided. Men like Lord Victor had taught her that power explained itself only after it had acted. Christopher waited. Edith thought of the women whose addresses she had copied in her neatest hand. Seamstresses with swollen fingers, widows recovering from fever, laundry workers whose old boots leaked in the rain. She thought of the shining rose beyond the screen and the broken soul beneath her skirt. "Stop the shoes, Your Grace," she said. "Not the women waiting for them." Something changed in his face. It was not a smile, though warmth briefly touched the severity around his mouth. It was recognition. "I understand." He rose and stepped back into the drawing room. Edith could not see all of him from behind the screen, but she heard the sudden quiet as he approached the central table. Teresa spoke first, bright and eager. "Your Grace, we were just about to show you the new subscription list." Miss Selwyn had a small mishap, but it needn't disturb the afternoon. "It has already disturbed it," Christopher said. The room went still. Lord Victor's voice followed, smooth with warning. "Surely one damaged personal pair doesn't justify alarming our subscribers." "The pair was issued from this fund," Christopher replied. Edith heard the rustle of skirts and the scrape of a chair. "Until its failure is independently examined, my patronage is suspended. No pair leaves Wrotham House." Teresa's sweetness thinned. "Christopher, that seems rather severe." "Your Grace," he corrected, without raising his voice. Silence fell again. Edith looked down at the shoe nearest her hand. The torn tongue had folded outward, exposing a faint chalk mark on the inner leather. She drew it closer beneath the shelter of her skirt. The mark read C17. Across the room, Christopher lifted one of the polished display shoes from the blue cloth. On its inner tongue, written in the same chalk, was another mark. S17. For several seconds after the Duke's order, no one in the blue drawing room seemed willing to move. The musicians had stopped without being told. A violinist still held his bow above the strings, frozen in the unfinished measure, while the nearest subscribers looked from Christopher to Lord Victor, and then toward the velvet screen behind which Edith sat barefoot. Teresa recovered first. Surely you don't intend to punish the entire subscription because Miss Selwyn wore an unsuitable pair, she said. Christopher turned the display shoe in his hand. The polished black leather caught the chandelier light without revealing anything of what lay beneath it. Miss Selwyn has already stated that her shoes came from returned fund stock. She may be mistaken. Then an examination will correct her. His gaze shifted to Victor. Unless there is a reason you prefer assumption. Victor's expression remained composed, but the hand resting against his waistcoat tightened. There is no reason to delay aid to deserving women. One failed pair proves very little. It proves enough to pause. Christopher set the shoe back upon the blue cloth, though not among the other pairs. He placed it alone at the end of the table. No pair leaves this house until the stock and the relevant records have been secured. Behind the screen, Edith heard Teresa draw a sharp breath. Christopher, you're allowing an employee's embarrassment to become a public accusation. Your Grace, he corrected again. This time the words were colder, and Miss Selwyn's embarrassment is not the question. Mrs. K entered the shelter of the screen with the housekeeper close behind her. Edith knew the widow only by reputation. Mrs. K was a steady woman in her middle years, dressed in dove-colored silk, with the calm expression of someone society had long ago failed to intimidate. She looked at Edith's covered feet, then at her face. "The morning room is empty," she said quietly. "Will you allow us to take you there?" Edith nodded. "Thank you." The housekeeper found a folded shawl and laid it across Edith's lap before reaching beneath the hem for the broken shoes. She did not expose Edith's stockings to the room. Each shoe went directly into a plain cloth bag, the torn left sole placed uppermost so it would not catch against the other. Edith kept the subscription book in her hand. She had the absurd feeling that if she released it, everything else might follow. Mrs. K noticed. "That belongs to the committee," she said, "but I think it may wait until you're seated somewhere less public." Edith almost smiled. "I suspect the committee has waited for less important things." The housekeeper brought a pair of soft house slippers. They were too large, but they would protect Edith's feet for the short distance down the corridor. With Mrs. K on one side and the screen still hiding her from most of the guests, Edith stood. Pain moved through her right ankle in a quick, hot pulse. She steadied herself before anyone could see. Across the room, Christopher did see. He said nothing. That silence spared her more effectively than concern would have done. The morning room smelled faintly of beeswax and early lilac from the narrow garden beyond the windows. Once the door closed, the fashionable murmur of the exhibition became distant. Edith sat upon a small settee, while the housekeeper knelt before her with warm water, clean linen, and a little jar of salve. Mrs. K remained beside the hearth. Christopher waited in the corridor until the housekeeper had cleaned the abrasion at Edith's right heel, wrapped it lightly, and lowered Edith's skirt into place. Only then did he enter. He stopped well beyond the carpet's center. "May I remain?" he asked. Edith looked at Mrs. K, then back at him. "Yes, Your Grace." The housekeeper confirmed that the ankle appeared strained rather than seriously injured. Edith would need rest, and a firm shoe once the swelling eased. No physician was necessary unless the pain worsened. Christopher accepted the judgment without attempting to improve upon it. Victor entered before anyone invited him. Teresa followed. "There," Victor said, glancing toward the bandage hidden beneath Edith's skirt. "A minor strain. I trust we may now return to the exhibition." Edith's shame hardened into something steadier. "The injury is minor, my lord. The broken soul is not." Teresa folded her hands. "You cannot prove that pear came from approved stock. I received it from the returned shelf in the fitting room 3 weeks ago." "On whose authority?" "Yours." Teresa's eyes sharpened. "I have no memory of that." "I do." Victor waved the exchange aside. "Memory is not evidence." Christopher's attention moved to the cloth bag beside Edith. "Miss Selwyn, may the shoes be examined?" She hesitated. They were still the only shoes she possessed that could pass beneath an evening skirt, broken though they were. Yet beyond the morning room, dozens of identical pairs waited to be sent into other women's lives. "Yes," she said, "but they remain mine unless a formal transfer is recorded." Something like approval passed through Christopher's face. "Agreed." The housekeeper lifted the torn left shoe from the bag and placed it upon a small table. Edith pointed to the faint chalk beneath the tongue, C17. Victor leaned closer but did not touch it. A workroom notation, nothing more. "The display pair bears S17, Christopher said. Teresa turned too quickly. "You cannot know that all workroom marks carry meaning." "No," he replied, "which is why the pair will be preserved." He proposed that the S17 display shoes be wrapped in clean paper, placed in a box and sealed before witnesses. The remaining stock ledger would be closed and secured until an independent solicitor could receive it the following morning. Victor objected that the committee's own secretary should retain the records. Mrs. K observed that an inquiry conducted entirely by those questioned would satisfy no one. 2 committee ladies, made uneasy by the Duke's withdrawal of patronage, agreed with her. Within minutes, the display pair rested in a narrow box beneath 3 separate wax seals: Christopher's, Mrs. K's, and that of Lady Wetherell, the eldest committee member present. The box would remain in the locked escritoire in the morning room until Mr. Noakes arrived. The ledger stayed in the committee office under a temporary sealed hold. Edith's broken shoes returned to the cloth bag beside her. Nothing had yet been proved, but nothing could now be quietly replaced. Victor's civility thinned. "Miss Selwyn has converted a private mishap into a spectacle. The subscribers will remember that." "They should remember who refused to examine it," Christopher said. Teresa looked toward Edith. "She has always been sensitive to attention." Edith met her gaze. "Only when it is used as a weapon." Mrs. K rose. "My carriage is ready. Miss Selwyn will come with me." Victor frowned. "She lives under my roof." "She is injured under it," Mrs. K replied. "She may spend the afternoon where rest will not be treated as disobedience." Edith placed both hands upon the settee and stood carefully. The borrowed slippers shifted beneath her. Her right ankle weakened without warning. Christopher crossed the space in one step and caught her lightly by the forearm. The contact lasted no more than a heartbeat. His hand was warm even through her sleeve. Edith felt the strength of his restraint before she felt the strength itself. He released her at once. "Forgive me. There is nothing to forgive." Her voice emerged softer than she intended. His eyes held hers, direct and searching, but he did not reach for her again. "May I offer my arm?" Edith understood the difference. The first touch had been instinct. This one was a choice offered to her. Yes, your grace. He positioned himself beside her without drawing her close. Edith placed her gloved hand upon his sleeve and allowed him to take only the weight she could not safely carry herself. He adjusted his pace to hers as they crossed the corridor. No announcement preceded them. None was needed. The guests, still gathered around the blue tables, watched the Duke of Cranmore escort the dismissed object of their amusement toward the front hall, while Teresa remained beside rows of shoes no one was now permitted to receive. Edith kept her chin level. She gave Christopher very little of her weight, though pain sharpened at every third step. He seemed to notice. You needn't prove you can walk without assistance while accepting it, he murmured. I'm not accustomed to distinguishing the two. Then we shall be precise. The quiet answer moved through her with more force than flattery could have done. At the carriage, Mrs. K entered first. Christopher helped Edith only as far as the step, then waited. She chose when to release his arm. Victor had followed them into the hall. You are making a grave error, Cranmore, he said. Miss Selwyn is turning an accident into an accusation against respectable people. Christopher looked back at him. No, your refusal to examine it did that. Edith settled beside Mrs. K as the door closed. Through the window, she saw the cloth bag placed safely at her feet. Inside it, the C-17 shoes remained in her possession. Behind them, within the sealed morning room, S-17 waited for Mr. Noakes. The carriage moved away from Wrotham House. Edith looked down at the bag and remembered the smooth, unbroken sole of the display pair. It had lacked the faint raised line she had seen beneath her own sole before it split. Whatever C and S meant, the difference had been hidden where no subscriber was expected to look. On the morning of the 11th May, Edith descended the shallow staircase at Wrotham House with one hand resting lightly upon the banister, and no intention of letting anyone mistake caution for weakness. The swelling in her right ankle had eased after a day of rest at Mrs. K's house, though each downward step reminded her that the strain had not entirely forgiven her. She wore plain morning shoes, borrowed from the housekeeper, and a dark green gown whose hem hid the bandage at her heel. The broken C-17 pair remained in their cloth bag in her room, exactly where she had placed them after returning the previous evening. No one had touched them. She had checked twice. In the front drawing room, Lady Teresa sat near the window, with embroidery arranged across her lap, and not a stitch completed. Lord Victor stood before the hearth, reading a letter with the grave concentration of a man who wished the paper to appear more important than the people around him. Both looked up when Edith entered. "You're walking," Teresa observed. "How reassuring. One might have thought the injury more serious from the spectacle made of it." Edith crossed to the chair nearest the writing table. The housekeeper said it was a minor strain. She did not say the shoes were sound. Victor folded the letter. "His Grace's solicitor arrives this morning. You will answer only what is asked." Edith sat without waiting for permission. "I've spent 3 years answering what your committee asks. That is why I know how many questions have gone missing." His expression hardened. Before he could reply, the butler announced the Duke of Cranmore, accompanied by his paternal aunt, Lady Anne Darlington, and Mr. Noakes. Christopher entered with the same controlled authority. Edith remembered from the exhibition, though the quiet morning light made him seem less remote than he had beneath the chandeliers. Lady Anne, a silver-haired widow in lavender silk, greeted Edith with a warmth that did not descend into fussing. Christopher bowed. His eyes moved briefly to Edith's careful stance, then returned to her face. "I trust the ankle has improved." "It has, Your Grace." "I'm glad." Nothing in his tone demanded gratitude. That small mercy steadied her. Mr. Noakes carried a leather case and a receipt book. The housekeeper brought the narrow box containing the sealed S-17 display pair from the locked escritoire. All 3 wax seals remained intact. Lady Anne inspected them first, then Mrs. K, who had arrived moments earlier at Christopher's request and now stood beside Edith's chair. Victor's displeasure at the number of witnesses showed only in the angle of his mouth. Mr. Noakes recorded the condition of each seal, accepted the box, and signed a receipt witnessed by Lady Anne and Mrs. K. The committee ledger followed from the office, still bound beneath the temporary paper strip and seal placed there 2 days earlier. Mr. Noakes examined the seal, noted that it had not been disturbed, and placed the ledger inside his case. "These items will remain in my custody until the inspection on Friday," he said. "No copy or extract will be made without a written record." "This is excessive," Victor replied. "It is exact," Christopher said. "That is what you objected was lacking." Teresa set down her embroidery. "We all want accuracy, Your Grace. What we don't want is a respectable charity dragged through scandal because one employee is dissatisfied with her wages." Edith looked at her. "My wages are 4 months late. The complaints are separate." Teresa's brows rose. "Complaints?" Christopher took the chair opposite Edith rather than the larger one beside Victor. "Miss Selwyn, will you explain your duties to Mr. Noakes?" Edith opened the smaller notebook she had brought from her room. It was not a committee ledger. It was her personal record of visits, fittings, and correspondence, kept because the official books were often unavailable when she needed them. "I copy recipient names and addresses. I arrange fitting times. When women cannot come here because of illness or distance, I visit them with a married committee member or another suitable companion. I also receive the blue-edged complaint tags attached to returned shoes." Mr. Noakes looked up. "How many have you received this quarter?" 17 that I can recall with certainty. I recorded the dates and names here." She turned the notebook toward him, but kept her hand upon it. "The official register contained only 3 when I last entered the committee office." Victor gave a short, humorless laugh. "Miss Selwyn records every expression of discomfort as if it were a formal grievance. Poor women unused to proper shoes often complain before the leather has softened. A shoe that opens in the rain is not resisting the foot," Edith said. "It is failing beneath it." Teresa leaned toward Christopher. "You see how she speaks now. She has mistaken clerical responsibility for authority." He did not look at Teresa. "I asked Miss Selwyn to explain her work." The rebuke was quiet, yet it left no room for further interruption. Edith continued. 3 women reported loose soles. 2 said the heels leaned inward. 1 widow returned her pair after wearing them twice. A laundry worker wrote that she fell near Bishopsgate when the stitching gave way. I placed each tag in the tray marked for review. "Mr. Noakes asked, who removes the tags from that tray?" "Usually Lady Teresa's maid carries them to the committee office. Sometimes the secretary collects them." Near the door, Ada Broom stood holding a tea tray. At the mention of the tags, the porcelain cups rattled softly against their saucers. Teresa turned her head. Ada lowered her gaze at once. Edith noticed. So did Christopher. Neither spoke of it. Mr. Noakes made a note. "Did you personally enter all 17 in the official register?" "No. I was told the secretary would do so after the committee determined which were formal complaints. Victor stepped forward. There. You admit the number in your private book is not the official number. I admit someone decided 14 women did not deserve to be counted. The room went still. Christopher's gaze remained on Edith, not with surprise, but with a concentration that made her feel he was hearing more than her words. He was hearing the years behind them. The fund bears my sister's name, he said at last. Teresa's expression softened instantly. Of course, we've all treated dear Lady Caroline's memory with the greatest reverence. Christopher's face changed. The grief did not make him gentler. It made him more precise. My sister disliked being displayed as an example of patient gratitude. During her final illness, visitors praised her sweetness whenever she was too tired to object to them. She once told me that suffering had made other people feel virtuous. No one interrupted. Edith saw the effort behind his composure and understood that this was not a story he often gave away. I endowed this subscription because I believed practical relief would honor her better than speeches, he continued. I reviewed the sums. I signed the annual reports. I accepted respectable names as evidence of respectable conduct. Victor shifted near the hearth. Christopher looked toward the sealed case beside Mr. Noakes. If inferior shoes have been issued beneath her name, then the memorial may have become the very display she despised. Teresa rose. Christopher, no one here would knowingly dishonor her. Your Grace, he said, but the correction lacked its earlier coldness. His attention had turned inward. Edith could have offered comfort. She could have assured him that generosity excused negligence. It would have been easier and false. Then let her name protect the truth, she said, not the appearance. His eyes met hers. For a moment, the room around them seemed to recede. There was no pity in his gaze, and Edith gave him none. What passed between them was quieter and more dangerous than sympathy. Recognition. Christopher inclined his head once. Yes. Mr. Noakes asked to see the C-17 marking before the Friday examination. Edith sent the housekeeper to bring the cloth bag from her room. When it arrived, she opened it herself and withdrew the broken left shoe. The sole hung loose where it had split, but the shoe remained otherwise unchanged. She folded back the tongue and loosened the narrow strip of leather, enough to reveal the chalk mark. Christopher leaned closer, though he did not touch it. Here, Edith said. She lifted the loose tongue so the light struck the letters. He extended his hand only after she turned the leather toward him. Their fingertips brushed. The contact was slight, no more than the passing of an object, yet both of them stilled. Edith felt the warmth of him through her glove. Christopher's eyes rose to hers. Neither held the touch beyond the instant. She released the leather. He withdrew his hand. C-17, he said, his voice lower than before. And the sealed pair is S-17, Mr. Noakes closed his receipt book. Mr. Tukes can examine both at his Bond Street shop on the 13th. I recommend the sealed pair remain with me. Miss Selwyn may retain her own shoes and bring them herself. Edith returned the broken shoe to the cloth bag. Its possession remained hers. Across the room, Ada lifted the tea tray again, but her face had lost its color as Mr. Noakes departed with the sealed S-17 box and the official ledger secured in his case. Edith watched the maid glance once toward Teresa, then toward the door. It was the look of someone who knew where something had gone and had just realized that silence might no longer keep her safe. On the 13th of May, the sealed box reached Mr. Tukes's shop in Bond Street before 10 o'clock, carried by Mr. Noakes and watched by 2 witnesses from the moment it left his carriage. Edith arrived with Mrs. K and the broken C-17 shoes in their cloth bag. She had slept poorly, not from pain, but from the knowledge that by noon the difference between accident and design might become impossible to ignore. Her ankle had nearly recovered. She walked without assistance, though she still favored the right side when turning. Christopher was already inside with Lady Anne Darlington. On the work table, Mr. Tooks had placed clean paper, a measuring rule, a stitching awl, and a small knife used for opening seams. He bowed to Edith first. "Miss Selwyn, I understand one pair belongs to you." "It does." She set the cloth bag on the table, but kept one hand upon it. "You may examine it. I'd like it returned to me afterward." "Of course." Mr. Noakes placed the sealed box beside it. Before anyone touched the lid, he read the receipt aloud and invited each witness to inspect the 3 wax seals. Christopher's crest remained unbroken. Mrs. K's seal was clear. Lady Wetherell's impression, pressed slightly crooked 2 days earlier, was unchanged. Mr. Tooks nodded. "Then we may proceed." Mr. Noakes cut the cords and opened the box. The S-17 display pair lay inside, wrapped in tissue. Their black kid leather uppers were smooth, the stitching even, the heels straight. Beside them, Edith withdrew the damaged left C-17 shoe. Its opened sole sagged like a loosened mouth. The right shoe followed, its heel still leaning inward. Mr. Tooks examined the chalk marks first. Same size number, different letter. Edith asked, careful not to make the answer fit her suspicion. Could the letter identify separate workmen? It could, Mr. Tooks said, or separate grades, or separate destinations. The mark alone proves nothing. Christopher stood on the opposite side of the table. Then let the materials speak. Mr. Tooks began with the S-17 pair. He pressed the sole with both thumbs, bent the forepart, and examined the welt. Solid leather midsole. Proper heel build. Close stitching. Not luxurious, but stout, suitable for regular walking if fitted correctly. He turned to C-17. His expression changed before he spoke. This upper is cut from leather, dressed to resemble the other. At a glance, the pairs would look nearly identical. He inserted the tip of his knife beneath the already split sole and lifted the damaged layers without extending the tear. Compressed paper appeared beneath the outer leather, mixed with scraps too small and uneven to support weight for long. The heel contained thin split leather packed around a rough core. "This isn't the same construction," he said. "It was made to appear the same from above." Lady Anne drew in a quiet breath. Mrs. K's mouth tightened. Edith looked at the display pair, then at her own. She remembered carrying them home in a plain parcel 3 weeks earlier. Teresa had called them more than adequate. Victor had called them part payment. "Would ordinary wear cause this?" Christopher asked. "Ordinary wear would expose it," Mr. Tooks replied. "It wouldn't create it. Damp would soften the paper and loosen the weaker layers. A woman might wear the pair twice in dry weather and believe it sound. Then the first wet crossing could finish it." Edith thought of the laundry worker near Bishopsgate. She saw again the 17 names in her notebook, each written neatly, because neatness was the only respect the committee had allowed those women to receive. Several complaints mentioned rain, she said. Loose soles. Heels turning. One woman fell. Mr. Tooks looked at her. That would be consistent. Mr. Noakes recorded the words exactly. "Can you determine who ordered the 2 grades? Not from the shoes. Can you determine whether the difference was accidental?" Mr. Tooks placed S-17 and C-17 side by side. A workman doesn't accidentally build a solid leather midsole into one pair and compressed paper into another. The outward resemblance also required intention, but I can't tell you whose intention. Christopher's jaw tightened, but he did not claim what the evidence had not proved. Then we know there are two constructions under one crest, he said. We don't yet know who authorized them. Edith noticed the discipline in that distinction. Rank could have allowed him to accuse Victor before breakfast and make society accept the accusation by dinner. He refused the convenience. She respected him for it, though respect had begun to carry a warmth she did not entirely trust. Mr. Tukes measured the sole thickness, counted the visible stitches, and dictated a comparison to Mr. Noakes. When it ended, Mr. Noakes rewrapped S-17, placed it back in the box, and sealed it again with his own seal and those of Lady Anne and Mrs. K. The pair returned to his custody. Edith replaced C-17 and its damaged mate in her cloth bag. They remained hers. Outside, Bond Street had darkened beneath a low sky. A fine rain had begun, silvering the pavement and gathering along the curb. Lady Anne and Mrs. K moved ahead beneath a shared umbrella while Mr. Noakes secured the sealed box in his carriage. Edith stepped carefully from the shop. She watched the wet stones with new awareness. Beside her, Christopher descended the step more slowly than she expected. His left leg held a fraction too stiffly, and for one moment his weight remained on the right before he moved forward. The hesitation was small. Most people would have missed it. Edith did not. She also saw the quick hardening of his expression when Lady Anne glanced back, as if he disliked being measured by concern. Edith shortened her stride without looking at him. She did not offer an arm. She did not ask whether he was injured. She simply matched a pace that allowed them to reach the carriage together. After several yards, Christopher said, "You're the first person in London to slow without making me feel delayed." His tone was dry, almost amused. Edith kept her eyes on the pavement. Then London walks too quickly. A quiet laugh escaped him. It changed his face more than a smile would have done. For a few steps they moved beneath the shop awning while the rain whispered beyond its edge. Their sleeves nearly touched, but neither closed the space. "You saw," he said. "It was not a question. I notice how people walk. Fittings require it." A professional answer, a truthful one. He looked toward the waiting carriage. "Thank you for not asking." Edith turned then. "You hadn't offered the information." Something unguarded passed through his eyes. Most people consider rank an invitation to curiosity. Most people consider dependence an invitation to cruelty. The words were sharper than she intended, but he did not retreat from them. "Then perhaps we've both been over-observed and poorly seen." The rain thickened at the edge of the awning. Edith felt the strange steadiness of standing beside a man who had witnessed her humiliation and had allowed her, in return, to witness something he preferred, hidden. No promise passed between them. No touch was offered. Yet when Mrs. K called for Edith, she left the shelter with the sense that a private boundary had shifted. Before entering the carriage, she remembered an address from her notebook. Mrs. Vale, a seamstress in Spitalfields, had returned a complaint after her soul opened in rain. Edith had recorded that the woman kept the damaged pair because she could not afford another. She looked back at Christopher. "There's someone we should visit." His expression sharpened. "A recipient?" "Yes, and she still has the shoes." By the afternoon of the 16th May, the rain had left Spitalfields shining beneath a pale, uncertain sun. Edith sat beside Mrs. K in the carriage, her broken C-17 shoes secured in their cloth bag at her feet. The shoes had not left her possession since Mr. Tukes examined them. Her ankle no longer troubled her, though the memory of that first collapse returned. Each time the wheels struck a rut, Lady Anne Darlington sat opposite, while Christopher rode beside her in a dark coat without any visible sign that the damp affected him. Edith knew better now than to mistake concealment for ease. Their first visit was to Mrs. Vale, the seamstress whose address Edith had remembered outside the Bond Street shop. The woman received them in a narrow upper room where 3 unfinished bodices hung from hooks, and every chair carried folded work. She looked frightened when she recognized Christopher. "I didn't ask for a duke, miss," she whispered to Edith. "I only asked whether the sole ought to open after 2 wearings." "You're not required to speak to anyone you don't choose," Edith said. Christopher remained near the door. "And you won't lose future relief because you speak," he added. "I'll put that in writing, Mrs." Vale studied him, then reached beneath her work table and brought out a pair of black shoes wrapped in newspaper. The left sole had separated across the forepart. Inside the tongue, the chalk mark began with C. "It happened crossing Commercial Street after rain," she said. "I tied it with ribbon and walked home. The committee visitor took my blue complaint tag. She said proper shoes needed breaking in." Edith asked, "Did anyone return to examine them?" No. Christopher's expression did not change, but the stillness around him deepened. He did not touch the shoes. He asked Mrs. Vale's permission before Mr. Noakes, who had followed in a separate carriage, recorded the condition in a small memorandum. The shoes remained with Mrs. Vale. Their second visit took them 2 streets farther east to a widow named Mrs. Green, who lived behind a chandler's shop. Her pair had failed near Whitechapel Road. She had walked the final half-mile in her stockings because the heel had bent inward and would not bear weight. "I was ashamed," she said, looking at the floor. "They were charity shoes. I thought complaining would make me ungrateful." Edith felt the words with painful familiarity. "Were you told that?" "Not directly. Lady Teresa's visitor said there were many widows who would be glad of what I had." Mrs. Green produced the shoes from beneath her bed. Both were marked C. The filling beneath one sole had swollen and broken apart after damp. Christopher crouched only far enough to see the exposed layers, then rose again without comment. When Mrs. Green apologized for the state of the room, he said, "You've nothing to apologize for. The room kept you dry. The shoes did not." Her eyes lifted to his in surprise. The third woman, Mary Holt, worked in a laundry near Brick Lane. Steam clung to the walls, and the air smelled of soap, wet linen, and coal. Mary had fallen when her right heel gave way on a stone step. She had not been badly hurt, but the laundry keeper had docked a day's wages because she arrived late after binding the shoe with twine. "I signed a paper when they gave them to me," Mary said. "It said I received them in gratitude and good order. The visitor told me another complaint might strike my name from the winter list." "Did you read the paper yourself?" Edith asked. "My sister did. I can sign my name, but the rest was too fine." Lady Anne's mouth tightened. Mrs. K asked gently whether Mary wished to show the pair. Mary did. The same C appeared beneath the tongue. The same weak layers had folded beneath the polished surface. 3 women, 3 failures, 3 complaint tags taken away. Edith had not imagined the pattern. She had merely been the first person in the committee rooms willing to remember it. Outside the laundry, the rain began again in a fine, cold mist. The carriage waited beyond a short flight of worn stone steps. Mrs. K and Lady Anne descended first beneath the footman's umbrella. Edith followed, watching the slick edge. Christopher stood one step below her. He opened his hand but did not reach. "May I?" The question carried none of the urgency of the morning room. This was not rescue after a stumble. It was an invitation given before she needed to fall. Edith placed her gloved hand in his. "You may." His fingers closed with careful firmness. He steadied her down the wet step, matching her weight rather than pulling her forward. When her feet reached the pavement, she should have released him. Instead, she held his hand for one extra beat. A slight tension had entered his jaw. His left leg remained straighter than the right, and the damp seemed to sharpen whatever pain he had hidden on Bond Street. His gaze dropped briefly to their joined hands, then returned to her face. He did not presume upon the moment. Edith loosened her fingers, but before she withdrew, she asked, "Which pace is comfortable?" Something guarded in him shifted. "A carriage overturned when I was 12, he said. The leg healed. It simply declined to become obedient afterward. His tone was dry, though the admission beneath it was not. Some days are easier than others. Damp is rarely courteous. Edith did not offer sympathy. She knew how quickly sympathy could become a mirror in which the suffering person disappeared. "Which pace?" she repeated. His thumb moved once against the side of her glove, so slight that it might have been only an adjustment. "The one we're keeping." She let go then. They walked toward the carriage, side by side, neither hurrying the other. Christopher allowed the footman to assist Lady Anne before he entered. He did not disguise the care with which he mounted the step. Edith looked away at the right moment, not to pretend she had not seen, but to give him ownership of what she had. Inside the carriage, Mrs. K spread Edith's notebook across her lap. Edith compared the 3 names with her personal entries. Each complaint had been dated. Each tag had been placed in the review tray. None appeared in the official register now held by Mr. Noakes. "They removed more than paper," Lady Anne said. "They removed the women from the record." Christopher looked through the carriage window toward the laundry. "My signature remained." Edith heard the blame he was beginning to direct inward. "Your signature made the fund easier to trust," she said. "It didn't order inferior souls." "No, but it may have made questions harder to ask." He did not seek absolution, and she respected him for that. Mrs. K turned to Edith. "How many pairs are scheduled for the next distribution?" Edith knew the figure because she had copied the recipient list before the exhibition. 180. The fitting sheets identify the delivery as batch C. The carriage seemed to grow smaller around the words. Until that day, C had been only a repeated mark. Mr. Tukes had proved it described a different construction. 3 women had proved what that construction did in rain. Christopher's gaze met Edith's. "When?" "The 3rd of June. 18 days. 180 pairs." Edith looked at the wet London streets sliding past the glass and imagined 180 women learning. Too late. That gratitude would not keep a soul beneath their feet. On the 19th May, Cranmore House received the committee beneath a ceiling painted with pale clouds and gold. Though nothing in the morning felt light. Mr. Noakes had placed the official register, the sealed S17 box, and his memoranda from Bond Street upon a long table in the smaller drawing room. The C17 shoes remained with Edith at Wrotham House, wrapped in their cloth bag and locked inside her room. She had brought only her personal notebook. Lady Anne sat near the window. Mrs. K occupied the chair beside Edith. Victor stood at the far end of the table with Teresa, both dressed as though the inquiry were an inconvenience beneath their dignity. Christopher entered last. He carried no cane, but the stiffness in his left leg was more noticeable than it had been on the dry pavement. Edith saw it and looked away before he could feel observed. Mr. Noakes opened the register to the current quarter. Miss Selwyn recalls 17 complaints, he said. The official book contains 3. Victor clasped his hands behind his back, because only 3 were judged formal. By whom? Christopher asked. The committee secretary, in consultation with Lady Teresa. Teresa gave a patient smile. Many recipients confuse discomfort with defect. We can't permit every complaint to become an accusation against the fund. Edith opened her notebook. A soul opening after rain isn't discomfort. A heel collapsing under a woman's weight isn't impatience. 3 recipients showed us the failures themselves. Victor's gaze sharpened. You visited them without committee approval, with Mrs. K and Lady Anne present, and with the Duke. Teresa's tone made the last words sound indecent. Christopher did not react. The visits were properly accompanied. Address the shoes, Mr. Noakes read the dates Edith had recorded. Each name corresponded to a fitting entry. Each complaint had been received before the exhibition. None of the 14 missing tags appeared in the official register. The room tightened around the silence that followed. Christopher rested one hand on the table. I signed the annual report, Mr. Noakes looked at him. Yes, Your Grace. The report stated that recipient satisfaction was high and defects negligible. It did. Christopher's expression remained controlled, but Edith saw the moment the words reached beyond embarrassment into guilt. I reviewed the sums, he said. I verified the number of pairs distributed. I didn't ask who had complained or how those complaints were judged. Victor lifted his chin. No patron of your rank can be expected to inspect every grievance personally. No, but a patron who lends his name to trust can be expected to ask what that trust rests upon. Teresa stepped nearer. Christopher, this was founded for your sister. Surely you don't want her memorial dragged into a vulgar dispute over workmanship. He turned to her. My sister is already in it. Her name is printed on every report. The finality of his voice ended the exchange. After Mr. Noakes adjourned the formal review, Lady Anne led Victor and Teresa toward the adjoining salon under the pretext of refreshments. Mrs. K followed slowly enough to remain within sight of the conservatory doors. Edith gathered her notebook, intending to leave before Christopher could mistake her silence for permission to console him. Miss Selwyn, he said. She paused. He stood beside the conservatory entrance, where filtered sunlight lay across the tiled floor. Will you walk with me? He glanced toward Mrs. K. Only as far as the orange trees. Edith nodded. Yes, Your Grace. The conservatory was warm and faintly damp, filled with citrus leaves, polished stone, and the quiet drip of water from a narrow fountain. Christopher shortened his pace, without making the adjustment obvious. Edith matched him. Neither mentioned it. At the second orange tree, he stopped beside a bench, but did not sit. Caroline hated visitors who praised her for being grateful, he said. Toward the end, she was too tired to object. They called her sweetness what was often exhaustion. Edith held her notebook against her waist. You told us she disliked being displayed. I thought money would prevent that. I thought if the fund bought useful things, then no one could turn her suffering into ornament. His mouth tightened. I examined accounts. I accepted polished reports. I let respectable people tell me what the recipients felt. You believed the people you appointed. That sounds almost like forgiveness. It isn't. He looked at her then. The honesty did not wound him. It steadied him. Edith continued. Trusting them wasn't the wrong. The wrong would begin now if you knew what happened and chose appearance instead. The fountain marked the silence between them. Christopher looked toward the glass roof, where London light gathered without warmth. My name made the fund easier to trust. Yes, and perhaps made the women harder to believe when they complained. Yes, the second answer cost more. He accepted it without turning away. I don't know whether I'm more angry with Victor or with myself. Anger may help you act. It shouldn't be allowed to decide what the women are permitted to say. His eyes returned to hers. What do you intend? Edith had thought about the question since the carriage left Spitalfields. Fear had accompanied every answer. So had the image of 180 pairs waiting for the 3rd June. I intend to speak at the next committee fitting, publicly. But for the subscribers who were told the fund had almost no complaints. Victor may dismiss you. He may. Theresa will say you're seeking attention. She already does, and the evidence isn't complete. That's why I'll ask for the recipients to be heard and the materials to be compared. I won't claim more than we know. Christopher studied her with a look that felt neither protective nor doubtful. It felt like respect. What do you need from me? An invitation they can't withdraw. The right to speak without being interrupted. Nothing said in my name before I say it myself. You have all three. Edith released a breath she had not meant him to notice. He noticed. There's one more thing, he said. His voice had lowered. May I hold your hand? The question moved through her with a force no command could have carried. He stood close enough for her to see the restraint in his face, yet he made no motion toward her. Edith considered the open space between them. In Spitalfields, she had taken his hand to cross a wet step. This was different. There was no danger beneath her feet, only grief, responsibility, and the choice to let another person stand near them. Yes, she said. Christopher extended his hand. Edith placed hers within it. His fingers closed slowly, giving her every moment to withdraw. She did not. They stood without speaking, while the fountain whispered behind them. His hand was warm and steady, but not perfectly so. A faint tension moved through his fingers when he said, My name made them easier to trust. Edith tightened her hold. Then use it now to make the truth harder to bury. His gaze lifted to hers. The sorrow in it did not disappear. It changed shape. You make honesty sound almost survivable. It usually is. Concealment is what consumes people. He held her hand for several breaths more, not drawing her closer, not asking for comfort she had not offered. Edith felt the intimacy of being trusted with his guilt, and the greater intimacy of answering it without gentleness becoming dishonesty. At last, she loosened her fingers. He released her immediately. Mrs. K appeared at the conservatory door. Lord Wrotham has gone, she said. Lady Theresa hasn't. She's speaking with the committee secretary. Edith closed her notebook. Then she's already preparing. Across London, before the afternoon ended, Theresa sent a maid to Edith's workroom with orders to remove every item from her writing drawer and place it in a sealed packet for the next fitting. On the 23rd of May, the public fitting at Wrotham House began beneath the same blue draperies that had framed the exhibition. But the atmosphere had changed. The polished shoes stood in ordered rows, yet every conversation lowered when Edith entered. She carried her personal notebook and nothing more. Her broken C-17 shoes remained locked in the cloth bag in her room. Mr. Noakes held the official ledger and the sealed S-17 pair in his own custody. Christopher stood near the front table with Lady Anne and Mrs. K close by. He met her eyes once, reminding her that he had promised her the right to speak. Teresa moved among the guests in pale rose silk, smiling with the brittle grace of a hostess who had already chosen the story she intended the room to believe. Victor waited beside the committee chair. "We'll begin with the fitting list," he announced. "There's no reason to permit private agitation to delay women who have been promised relief." Edith stepped forward. "There is reason if the shoes are unsound." Several heads turned. One of the 3 recipients from Spitalfields stood near the rear with her hands folded tightly over a worn reticule. Edith had asked that all 3 women be invited, but only Mrs. Vale had come. Fear had kept the others away. "I ask that Mrs. Vale be heard before the fitting proceeds," Edith said. "I also ask that Mr. Tuke's comparison be entered into the committee minutes." Teresa's smile deepened. "Before we hear Miss Selwyn's accusation, perhaps we should examine the manner in which it was prepared." She lifted one hand. Ada Broom entered, carrying a rectangular packet wrapped in brown cloth and tied with white tape. A paper strip crossed the knot, stamped with the Rotham household seal. Edith recognized the cloth before the packet reached the table. It had once lined the bottom of her work drawer. "Where did you get that?" she asked. Teresa looked almost wounded by the question. "From your writing room." "The contents were removed in the presence of my maid, after we learned that committee property might have been withheld. They were not committee property." "Then you won't object to explaining them." Victor broke the seal himself. He drew out several pieces of split sole, scraps of thin black leather, blue-edged notes in Edith's handwriting, and narrow strips of damaged stitching. Edith knew every item. The sole fragments had been given to her by recipients who could not spare the whole pair. The notes recorded names, dates, rain, loosened heels, and unanswered complaints. She had preserved them because no one else had. Teresa lifted one cut fragment between 2 fingers. "These edges are clean." They were cut from already failed soles, so the women could continue wearing what remained, Edith said. "With permission." "Whose permission?" "The owner's." "Recorded where?" Edith's answer came a fraction too slowly. "In my notebook, when they asked me to keep the pieces." "Not under committee seal?" "No." "Not witnessed?" "No." Teresa turned slightly so the subscribers could see her profile. "Then, what we have is a private collection of damaged leather, cut by Miss Selwyn, accompanied by her own notes, and held outside official custody." A murmur passed through the room. Victor placed both hands on the table. "Miss Selwyn has spent weeks persuading recipients that ordinary discomfort is proof of fraud. Now we learn she has been cutting the shoes herself." Mrs. Vale spoke from the back. "She didn't cut mine before it broke." The seamstress flushed but continued. "The sole opened in rain. Miss Selwyn asked if she might keep a loose piece after I tied the rest." Teresa's gaze sharpened. "And did she tell you a duke would visit your room if you complained?" Mrs. Vale recoiled as though struck by the implication. Edith's shame burned hotter than it had when the shoe broke beneath her. "The visit was properly accompanied," she said. "Mrs. K. and Lady Anne were present." "Of course," Teresa replied. "Yet London isn't discussing the chaperones." The murmur changed. Edith heard the words attention, ambition, and Cranmore move behind fans. Victor opened one of her notes. "You have written here that the leather was deliberately disguised. That is not clerical language. It is an accusation. It is a description of what Mr. Tukes found after you brought him pieces you had handled. He examined the sealed S17 pair from Mr. Noakes's custody and my intact, broken shoes. These fragments were not used in that comparison. Mr. Noakes rose. That is correct. Teresa did not look at him, but Miss Selwyn's own pair was never under neutral custody before the exhibition. She could have weakened it. Christopher's voice entered the room with quiet force. Enough. He stood without moving toward Edith. The investigation will continue. My patronage remains suspended. Miss Selwyn has the right to answer every allegation made in this room. Victor's expression hardened. Do you declare her innocent, Your Grace? If Christopher said yes, Teresa would claim he had abandoned evidence for personal preference. If he hesitated, the room would hear doubt. Edith held his gaze. He had promised not to speak in her name. I declare that accusation is not proof, he said. I also declare that no one will remove Miss Selwyn before she has spoken. The answer did not rescue her. It gave her ground. Edith stepped beside the table, though every instinct urged her to leave the fragments where they had been placed and flee the staring room. I preserved what failed, she said. I did not cause it to fail. These pieces came from women who could not surrender their only shoes. I wrote their names because the committee register did not. I cut nothing before it broke. I frightened no one. I asked only whether gratitude had become the price of silence. Mrs. Vale lifted her chin. That's what she asked me. Teresa set down the fragment. And did she not tell you your complaint might expose corruption? She told me I was allowed to say the shoes hurt. The simplicity of it unsettled the room more than anger might have done. Victor recovered first. Mr. Noakes, take the packet, inventory every item. Until its origin is proved, nothing in it is to be treated as reliable. Mr. Noakes untied a fresh paper wrapper. Before placing anything inside, he read each item aloud while 2 committee members witnessed the list. The packet entered his custody then, not before. Edith watched the fragments disappear beneath clean paper. Their condition had not changed. Their meaning had. Teresa turned to the guests with a sorrowful expression. The fitting must continue. 180 women expect shoes on the 3rd of June. We can't disappoint them because Miss Selwyn has chosen to make herself the center of this undertaking. Those 180 pairs are marked C, Edith said, which is precisely why they must not be distributed. Victor's restraint broke. You are no longer employed by this committee. The words struck with less surprise than finality. Your wages remain under review because of irregular conduct. You will leave Wrotham House by tomorrow afternoon. Mrs. Kay rose immediately. Lady Anne did the same. Christopher took one step forward, then stopped. Edith saw the effort it cost him not to turn the dismissal into a ducal command. This was her answer to give. Then I will leave, she said, but the shoes will still fail. No one laughed. Teresa announced that the 3rd June distribution at St. Martin's Hall would proceed as planned. The musicians resumed a restrained peace, as though music could return the room to respectability. Edith walked out with her notebook, her reputation wounded, her wages withheld, and one day to find another roof. Behind her, Mr. Noakes sealed the fragments under witnessed custody. Ahead of her waited 10 days, 180 pairs of defective shoes, and no position from which society believed she had the right to speak. At 9:30 on the morning of the 24th of May, Edith closed the lid of her trunk and looked around the small room at Wrotham House that had contained nearly all of her life for 3 years. The walls were bare where her shawl and 2 modest prints had hung. Her personal clothing lay folded beneath the maternal sewing case she had carried since girlhood. Her fitting notebook rested on top, wrapped in plain paper to protect the pages. Beside it sat the cloth bag containing the broken C-17 shoes. The left sole remained split. The right heel still leaned inward. Nothing about them had changed, except the meaning attached to their damage. She took no committee ledger, no copied report, no correspondence belonging to the subscription. Even the sharpened pencils on her work table remained where the committee had placed them. Teresa had accused her of carrying away what was not hers. Edith would leave no shadow in which that lie might grow. Ada Broom stood just inside the doorway, with both hands clasped tightly at her waist. "The carriage is below, Mrs. Kay's?" "Yes." Ada glanced toward the trunk. "Lady Anne sent word that you might stay at Cranmore House until matters are settled." Edith had received the offer with gratitude and refused it with care. To move directly from Victor's roof beneath the Duke's would give Teresa a simpler story than the truth. "Lady Anne has been very kind," she said, "but Mrs. Kay has agreed to take me." Ada lowered her voice. "They'll say you chose the widow's house because His Grace visits there. They'll say whatever protects them." Edith fastened the cloth bag and placed it inside her traveling case. "What matters is whether they can prove it." Ada looked toward the corridor, where servants carried breakfast trays and pretended not to listen. Something strained behind her silence. Edith did not press. Fear did not become courage because someone demanded it. "Thank you for bringing the carriage notice," she said. Ada nodded and withdrew. When Edith reached the front hall, Lady Anne waited beside Mrs. Kay. Christopher was not present. His absence hurt more than Edith expected, and she was ashamed of the hurt until she understood its discipline. He had offered no dramatic intervention. He had not come to carry her trunk, command Victor, or make her departure look like an elopement disguised as charity. He had remembered that she wished to choose her own ground. Lady Anne held out both hands, but did not embrace her. "Cranmore House remains open to you. I know, and I'm grateful." Edith looked toward Mrs. Kay. "But Bloomsbury is better." "Because it's yours to choose," Lady Anne said. "Exactly." Victor appeared at the head of the stairs as the footman lifted Edith's trunk. "You understand," he said. "That removal from the house does not release you from responsibility for the property you damaged." Edith faced him. "I damaged no property. That will be determined." "Yes, it will." Teresa stood behind him, pale and elegant, one hand resting against the banister. "You might still avoid ugliness if you return the missing records. I have taken nothing that belongs to the committee." Teresa smiled. "Then perhaps your new protectors will be disappointed." Mrs. Kay moved closer to Edith, but Edith answered for herself. "Protection that depends upon my helplessness would disappoint me." She stepped into the carriage without looking back. By noon, Victor's circular had begun its journey through London. It stated that Miss Edith Selwyn had been removed from the ladies' convalescent shoe subscription for irregular conduct and the suspected damaging of charitable property. Copies went to subscribers, patronesses, and 2 clergy households connected to the fund. One reached Mrs. Kay's drawing room before Edith had finished unpacking. She read it once, folded it, and placed it beneath a paperweight. "You could ask the Duke to suppress this," Mrs. Kay said. "His name would stop half the copies before dinner and make the other half more interesting." Edith opened her fitting notebook. "No, let Victor publish what he can defend." She spent the next hour reviewing dates, recipients, deliveries, and scraps of information that had seemed unimportant when written. 3 narrow paper wrappers had been pasted inside the back cover. Because Edith disliked losing addresses. Each bore the same warehouse direction in Long Acre and the same delivery clerk's initials. She remembered receiving them with different consignments of shoes, all marked for the common fitting room rather than the display tables. These came with the C batches, she said. Mrs. K leaned over the notebook. The warehouse may have records, or someone who remembers. By 2 o'clock they were traveling south and west in a hackney carriage, the wrappers secured inside Edith's reticule. She left the broken C-17 shoes locked in Mrs. K's guest room. The journey from Bloomsbury took less than half an hour through crowded streets and wagon traffic. Long Acre smelled of wet timber, horses, leather, and coal smoke. The warehouse stood behind a narrow yard where empty packing cases had been stacked beneath a tarred awning. A clerk at the front desk denied knowledge of separate shoe grades. When Edith showed him the wrappers, his eyes moved toward the rear office before he repeated the denial. Mrs. K noticed. "Is there anyone who worked here when these consignments were packed?" she asked. The clerk said the former foreman had been dismissed after a dispute over wages. He gave the name reluctantly and an address 2 courts away. They found the man in a small room above a cooper's shop. Mr. Ellis was broad-shouldered, grey at the temples, and suspicious of every polished word. "I don't speak against employers for amusement," he said. "I'm not asking for amusement," Edith replied. "I'm asking why shoes marked S and C were built differently beneath the same crest." His expression altered. "Who told you what the letters meant?" "No one." A cordwainer proved the construction differs. 3 recipients proved the C shoes fail in rain. Mrs. K remained beside the door, respectable and plainly visible. Edith placed the wrappers on the table. "These passed through your warehouse." Mr. Ellis studied them for a long moment. "S meant show," he said at last. "C meant common. The show pairs went to committee rooms, exhibitions, and inspections, better midsole. Closer work. The common pairs went to recipients." Edith's throat tightened. "Were they billed separately?" "No. Every pair was invoiced as stout leather walking shoes." "Who ordered the grades?" "The instructions came through Rotham's committee office. The supplier knew. The packing clerk knew. I knew after the second consignment." "Why were you dismissed?" "I objected when they held back wages after I asked why complaint returns never came to us." He crossed to a cupboard and withdrew a narrow personal daybook worn at the corners. He opened it but kept one hand on the cover. The pages showed dates, quantities, and the letters S and C beside separate loads. Edith did not reach for it. "May I read the relevant entries here?" "You may." She copied nothing without his permission. Mr. Ellis turned the pages himself. The book recorded that all complaint returns were to be sent directly to Rotham House, rather than to the manufacturer. It also noted a supplier allowance deducted from the final account and paid by Victor's instruction to a carriage creditor holding an overdue Rotham note. "Would you show this to Mr. Noakes?" Edith asked. "If he guarantees I won't be threatened with a false character before I speak. I can ask him to advise you independently. I can't promise the outcome, Mr." Ellis gave her a searching look. "That's more honest than most promises I've heard." He agreed to meet the solicitor, but the original daybook remained with him. Edith left the room, carrying only the knowledge he had chosen to give. Outside, the afternoon light had sharpened along the roofs. The evidence no longer pointed merely to poor workmanship. It pointed to 2 standards of charity, one for display and one for women expected to accept whatever failed beneath them. In the carriage, Mrs. K asked what she would do next. Edith looked down at the wrappers in her reticule. I need to know whether Christopher will place his own name beside theirs when the truth is examined. At Mrs. K's house, she wrote a single question in her own hand and sealed it, before doubt could soften the words. Will you permit your own name to be examined with theirs? On the 27th of May, Christopher came to Mrs. K's Bloomsbury drawing room at 11 o'clock in the ordinary Cranmore town carriage, with Lady Anne beside him and a footman at the step. He carried a cane. The polished black shaft was plain, and he made no attempt to hide it behind his coat when Mrs. K received them. Edith noticed the admission before anything else. 3 days earlier, she had asked whether his name could be examined with Victor's and Teresa's. He had answered by requesting a formal call. Mr. Noakes arrived 10 minutes later with his receipt book and a leather case. The broken C-17 shoes remained in Edith's guest room until she herself brought the cloth bag downstairs. Mr. Ellis's daybook remained with Mr. Ellis. Only a copied extract, prepared with his permission and marked as a copy, lay inside Mr. Noakes's case. Nothing had moved without record. That order steadied Edith as she took the chair opposite Christopher. Mrs. K sat near the window. Lady Anne remained by the tea table, close enough for propriety, and far enough to leave the conversation its dignity. Christopher rested both hands on his cane. Your note asked a precise question, he said. I've come to give you a precise answer. Edith held his gaze. Then I must tell you exactly what I'm asking. Please do. She set 3 paper wrappers from Longacre on the table. Mr. Ellis confirmed that S meant show and C meant common. The show pairs were used for exhibitions and inspections. The common pairs went to recipients. Both were invoiced as stout leather walking shoes. Christopher's face grew still, and the supplier allowance, applied by Lord Rotham's instruction to a carriage creditor holding an overdue Rotham note. Mr. Ellis recorded the destination in his own daybook. He'll show the original to Mr. Noakes if he's advised independently and protected from a false character. Christopher turned to the solicitor. Mr. Noakes nodded. I have arranged to see him tomorrow. I hold no original from him. Edith continued. The evidence does not stop with Victor and Teresa. Your patronage letters brought subscribers. Your signature appears on the annual reports. Your endowment payments gave the fund credibility. If we examine only the concealed grades and not the authority that made them respectable, the truth will be incomplete. Christopher's fingers tightened once around the cane, then eased. What do you require from me? The original patronage letters, the annual reports you signed, the endowment payment records, and, when the matter is heard, a public admission that your name made the fund easier to trust. Edith forced herself to add, that admission may stain Lady Caroline's memorial. Society may remember the fraud more readily than the purpose for which you gave the money. Christopher looked toward the rain-dimmed window. Her memory is not honored by keeping another woman silent. He turned back to Edith. You may have the papers. Mr. Noakes may have them, she corrected. Not me. Respect warmed his expression. Mr. Noakes may have them. Originals, with a full receipt. And you won't ask me to soften the proof? No. Or make silence a condition of your support? No. Or announce protection, courtship, or any personal claim to explain why you believe me? His answer came without hesitation. No, the certainty entered her more deeply than any promise of rescue could have done. He was agreeing to stand where the evidence could reach him too. Mr. Noakes opened his case. Christopher's secretary, waiting in the hall, brought in a tied packet bearing the Cranmore seal. Before it was opened, The solicitor read the listed contents aloud. 7 patronage letters, 3 signed annual reports, endowment payment records for the previous 2 years. Christopher confirmed each item. Mr. Noakes received the originals, issued a signed receipt, and locked them in the case. Only then did Edith go upstairs for the cloth bag. She returned with the broken C-17 shoes, exactly as they had been since Mr. Tukes's inspection. The left sole remained split. The right heel remained unstable. The chalk mark remained visible beneath the tongue. Mr. Noakes described their condition aloud. Edith signed the transfer line, and he signed beneath her. The shoes passed from her possession into his custody. For the first time since the exhibition, they would not sleep in the same room as she did. The loss felt intimate, as though she had surrendered the private evidence of how long she had endured without being believed. A knock sounded. Mrs. K's maid entered and whispered to her mistress. Mrs. K looked at Edith. "Ada Broom is here. She says she has Lady Teresa's permission to deliver a message, but she asks to speak before witnesses." Christopher shifted as if to rise. Edith met his eyes. He remained seated. "Let her choose whom she addresses," she said. Ada entered pale and rigid, carrying a sewing box against her chest. She curtsied, then looked at Edith. "I'm sorry, miss. Tell us what you came to say." Ada placed the box on the table, but kept both hands upon it. "Lady Teresa ordered me to remove the blue-edged complaint tags from the review tray. She said the women were making trouble over shoes. They'd been given for nothing. Returned pairs were to be put out of committee sight. When inspections were announced, I was to bring sound pairs from the S shelves." Mr. Noakes asked, "Did Lord Wrotham know?" "He knew complaints were being kept from the main book. I can't say what he knew about every pair." The distinction mattered. Edith saw Christopher recognize it. "Why have you come now?" she asked. Ada opened the sewing box. Beneath reels of thread and folded linen lay a bundle of blue-edged tags tied with grey tape. "She told me to burn them after the exhibition. I couldn't." Her voice trembled. The names were still on them. It felt like burning the women. Edith breathed slowly. "Have these remained with you?" "Yes, miss. Hidden beneath my sewing. Has anyone else handled them?" "No, Mr." Noakes moved the bundle only after Ada gave permission. He counted the tags, without reading the names aloud, described their condition, and wrote a receipt. Ada signed carefully. The original bundle entered his custody. "I'll need a full statement later," he said. "You're entitled to independent advice before giving it." Christopher added, "You'll also need a reference that doesn't depend upon Cranmore House." Ada looked at him in surprise. "Your Grace, if you enter my service, they'll say you were purchased. Mr. Noakes will arrange a respectable independent placement if you wish." Ada nodded, her eyes filling. "I do." No one touched her. No one asked for gratitude. When she had gone, Christopher rose more slowly than he had entered. The rain had sharpened the pain in his leg. Edith saw him prepare to conceal it and then stop. "The cane is new to me," she said. "Not new," he replied, "only less hidden." He held it out slightly. Edith touched the curved handle with 2 fingers, testing its balance only because he had invited her to. The wood was warm from his hand. She returned it at once. "You don't need to hide it from me." His gaze held hers. "You're the first woman who has made being seen feel unlike surrender." The words drew them closer without either taking a step. Edith answered with the truth. "Perhaps because I don't need you to be uninjured in order to be strong." His expression softened, though the sadness remained. Inside Mr. Noakes's case lay the broken shoes, the patronage papers, the copied warehouse extract, and the blue-edged tags each in one recorded place. For the first time, Edith was no longer the only person carrying the truth. Somewhere in Mayfair, Victor Croxley was about to learn that the Duke of Cranmore had placed his own name inside the inquiry. On the 30th of May, Victor Croxley's offer arrived at Mrs. K's house shortly after breakfast, folded beneath the Wrotham seal, and carried by a liveried servant who waited in the hall, as though Edith's answer could be purchased before the tea cooled. The letter promised 4 months of unpaid wages, a favourable reference, and an assurance that no further accusation would be circulated among subscribers. In return, Edith was to withdraw from the inquiry before the 3rd of June, surrender any private notes concerning the subscription, and state that her concerns had arisen from misunderstanding and personal distress. Mrs. Kai read the final line over Edith's shoulder and made a sound of quiet disgust. He calls it reconciliation, because bribery would require honesty. Edith placed the letter flat upon the writing desk. Her hands were steady. The steadiness surprised her less than it once would have done. Wrotham House had taught her to endure. The days since leaving had taught her to decide. "Will you answer him?" Mrs. K asked. "Yes," through Mr. Noakes. Edith drew a clean sheet toward her and wrote without ornament. She stated that the unpaid wages were a lawful debt and not a favour. She refused every condition attached to their payment. She would not surrender her personal notebook. She would not withdraw from the inquiry. She would not describe evidence as misunderstanding merely because the truth embarrassed respectable people. When she had finished, she read the letter aloud to Mrs. Kai, sealed it, and sent it to Mr. Noakes, with Victor's original enclosed for copying and safekeeping. The original offer remained with Edith until the solicitor's clerk arrived, recorded the transfer, and issued a receipt. By noon, Mr. Noakes held the original in the civil file. Edith retained only a copy of her refusal. Christopher came at 2 with Lady Anne. He used his cane openly, the black shaft touching the carpet, once before he crossed to the chair Mrs. K indicated. Rain had begun beyond the windows, and the damp showed in the careful set of his left leg. He did not disguise it, nor did Edith pretend not to see. Lady Anne and Mrs. K settled near the tea-table, within clear sight, then turned their attention to correspondence. Neither woman appeared to be reading. Christopher looked at Edith. "Mr. Noakes told me Victor made an offer." "He told you only that one existed?" "He said the content was yours to disclose." Edith felt a small, fierce gratitude for the solicitor's restraint. "Victor offered my wages, a reference, and silence if I withdrew before the distribution." Christopher's jaw tightened. "Your wages were never his to bargain with." "That was my answer. And the letter, with Mr. Noakes, the original, under receipt." Christopher inclined his head. "Good." He seemed about to say more, then stopped. The pause was unlike his usual control. It carried effort. "There is something I owe you," he said. Edith folded her hands in her lap. "Then say it plainly." "I intend to." He rested both hands upon the head of his cane. "At Wrotham House, when your shoes broke, my first instinct was to command the room. I asked your permission before stopping the distribution, but only after I had already decided that I knew what ought to happen." Edith remembered the quiet fury in his face behind the velvet screen. "You did ask." "Yes, but I'm not going to hide behind the best part of my conduct and ignore the rest." His gaze did not leave hers. "I should have understood sooner that protection can become another form of control when it assumes the protected person has no judgment of her own." Edith said nothing. He continued, I signed annual reports instead of listening to recipients. I accepted respectable names as proof of respectable behavior. I let the committee's polished language replace the voices of women who had already spoken. My patronage did not create the inferior shoes, but it made those shoes easier to distribute and the complaints harder to believe. The apology was not graceful. It was better than graceful. It was exact. I was wrong, he said, not only careless, wrong. Edith felt the force of the words settle between them. You were not the one who ordered 2 grades. No, you did not remove the complaint tags. No, you did not withhold my wages. No. His expression tightened, as though he feared she meant to absolve him. She did not. But you allowed your name to stand where your attention should have been, she said. Yes. That is the part that belongs to you. Yes. He accepted the boundary without reaching across it. Something inside Edith softened, not because he had become innocent, but because he had refused the easier performance of innocence. There is more, Christopher said. His fingers shifted against the cane. I'm afraid of what happens when this becomes public. Edith waited. Not only to the fund, he continued, to Caroline. His voice lowered around his sister's name. Society remembers scandal more eagerly than generosity. They may speak of her memorial as a fraud, though she had no part in it. They may decide my grief made me foolish. They may say, the weakness in my leg made me susceptible to manipulation, as though injury spreads into judgment. The last words were spoken evenly, but Edith heard the history beneath them. Years of rooms in which a duke's authority was praised while his body was watched for failure. Years of people pretending not to see his cane until they wished to use it against him. And will that stop you? She asked. No, the answer came at once. It frightens me. It doesn't alter what I'll do. Edith looked at him for a long moment. She had been pitied by people who did nothing. She had been advised by people who risked nothing. Christopher was offering neither pity nor advice. He was placing fear before her without asking her to remove it. You don't need me to tell you that fear is unreasonable. She said it isn't. No, and I won't promise society will be kind. I know. But if you speak before the evidence is presented, if you acknowledge what your patronage allowed, then they cannot use your silence as another shield. Christopher's mouth curved faintly, though there was no humor in it. You make accountability sound almost merciful, only compared with concealment. The rain strengthened against the glass. Mrs. K turned a page she had not been reading. Lady Anne lowered her gaze to preserve the privacy of a room that was not private. Edith saw Christopher's composure fray at the edges, not into collapse, but into weariness. He had carried authority like armor for so long that setting one piece aside seemed to cost him more than standing. The impulse to go to him came without calculation. She did not obey it at once. She wanted the moment to remain a choice for both of them. Christopher's, she said. It was the first time she had used his name without title. His eyes lifted. May I hold you? He did not move. For one breath, surprise opened his expression completely. Then he answered, yes. Edith rose and crossed the small distance between them. She stopped close enough that he could still refuse. He did not. She placed her arms around him, gentle at first, then more firmly when he leaned toward her. Christopher remained still until her cheek rested against his shoulder. Only then did his arms close around her. The embrace was warm, restrained, and deeply human. He did not pull her tighter than she offered. She did not soothe him with false promises. For several breaths, they simply stood together, while rain traced the windows, and two older women guarded the dignity of their silence. Edith felt the tension leave him by degrees. She also felt the strength that remained. When she began to draw back, he released her immediately. His hands fell away before hers did. They looked at one another from inches apart, but neither reached for more. No kiss belonged in a moment shaped by grief and confession. Not yet. Edith returned to her chair. Christopher sat carefully, the cane beside his knee. The room had changed, though nothing improper had occurred. Trust had taken a physical form and then yielded when asked. There must be conditions for the 3rd June, Edith said. His expression sharpened back into attention. Name them. The recipients speak before the financial motive is presented. Their experience must not become decoration around the accounts. Agreed. You acknowledge your patronage before condemning Victor or Teresa. Agreed. No engagement announcement. No courtship declaration. Nothing that allows them to say, I was rewarded for accusation. His gaze held hers. Agreed. And the remedies must not be decided by you alone. The committee and the affected women must have a voice. Christopher nodded. Then that is how it will be done. Outside, somewhere beyond Bloomsbury, 180 pairs of C-grade shoes were still being prepared for St. Martin's Hall. Inside Mrs. K's drawing room, Edith and Christopher had chosen the order in which truth would enter the room. On the morning of the 1st June, the small garden behind Mrs. K's Bloomsbury house held the washed brightness that follows night rain. Edith stood beneath a pear tree with the speaking order folded inside her reticule, and the knowledge that, in 2 days, every lie told at Wrotham House would have to withstand the voices of the women it had harmed. Mrs. K sat near the open French doors with a basket of mending, close enough to preserve propriety and far enough to grant the conversation privacy. Christopher arrived with Lady Anne, walking openly with his cane. The polished shaft touched the gravel in an even rhythm as he crossed the path. He no longer tried to hide the stiffness in his left leg, and Edith no longer pretended not to see the effort some mornings required. When he reached her, he bowed. Miss Selwyn. Your Grace. The formality steadied them both. Lady Anne joined Mrs. K near the doors, and Christopher gestured toward the stone bench beneath the pear tree. May we sit? Yes. They took opposite ends, with enough space between them to satisfy any observer and not enough to make the distance feel empty. Edith removed the folded paper from her reticule. Mr. Noakes has confirmed the order for St. Martin's Hall. She read each item aloud. First, your statement as principal patron. Second, my account of the opening failure and the C-17 shoes. Third, the recipients. Fourth, Mr. Tukes. Fifth, Ada. Sixth, Mr. Ellis. Seventh, the records and the remedies. Christopher nodded after each point. I won't interrupt you, not even if Victor attacks my character again. His jaw tightened. Especially then. I may stop disorder. I won't take your answer from you. Edith looked down at the page. That promise mattered more because he had already proved capable of keeping it. Mrs. Vale will speak first among the recipients, she said. Mrs. Green and Mary Holt have agreed to come if their names are not announced before they enter the hall. Mr. Noakes will see that they are received privately, and the shoes remain where they belong. Your C-17 pair is still locked in his cabinet. The S-17 display pair remains sealed in the evidence box. Ada's tags are in a separate packet under receipt. Mr. Ellis still holds his original daybook and will bring it himself. Edith allowed herself a breath. Nothing had moved without record. Nothing depended upon memory alone now. Christopher studied her face. You've carried this almost to the end. Not alone, no. but too often as though you had to. The words entered quietly. Edith folded the paper once more. Tomorrow may not end it. I know. Victor can dispute the accounts. Teresa can deny intent. Recovery may take months. And society may decide the scandal is more entertaining than the truth. It usually does. His dry answer brought the faintest smile to her mouth. Christopher saw it, and for a moment the grave concentration between them softened. Then he looked toward the wet leaves above them. There's something I don't want to wait until after the hearing to say. Edith's fingers tightened around the folded paper. Why not? Because I don't want a public verdict to appear to create a private truth. He turned back to her. There was no ducal command in his expression now. No practiced confidence. Only a man choosing to be fully seen. If the committee condemns Victor, that won't make you worthy of being believed. If the room applauds you, that won't make you worthy of being loved. You are both already. Edith could hear Mrs. K's needle moving faintly through cloth near the open doors. The garden seemed very still. Christopher set his cane against the bench, within reach, but no longer between his hands. I love you, Edith, he said, not because you need protection, but because truth becomes braver when you are near it. I love the way you refuse comfort that requires dishonesty. I love the way you see weakness without turning it into humiliation. I love that you asked me to stand in the evidence rather than above it. Edith had imagined many forms of safety during the years at Rotham House. A paid account, a door she could close, shoes that did not fail beneath her. She had never imagined that love might feel like being recognized without being reduced. Emotion rose through her, but it did not steal her voice. I love you too, Christopher. His name came naturally now. I love the man who is willing to be seen, not merely the Duke who can make others look. I love that you listened when I told you where to stand. I love that you didn't ask me to become smaller so your protection could seem larger. A breath left him, almost a laugh and almost grief. That may be the kindest indictment I've ever received. It wasn't intended as kindness. No, that's why I trust it. They looked at one another across the narrow space on the bench. Edith felt no urge to retreat from what she had said. The confession did not bind her to a proposal, a household, or a future she had not chosen. It belonged to the present, freely given. Christopher's gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then returned to her eyes. May I kiss you? The question did not break the tenderness. It deepened it. Edith heard the care inside the words and the restraint that left the answer entirely hers. Yes, she said. She rose first. Christopher stood more slowly, reaching for his cane only after he had found his balance. Edith stepped close enough to feel the warmth of him. She placed one gloved hand against his cheek. His skin was warm beneath the thin kid leather, and the surprise in his eyes gave way to something softer. She closed the remaining distance herself. Christopher bent his head and kissed her. The first touch was gentle, almost questioning. Edith answered by keeping her hand at his face and leaning nearer. His free hand settled lightly at her upper arm, not drawing her closer than she had chosen. The kiss deepened only in feeling. It remained tender, unhurried, and entirely theirs. When Edith drew back, Christopher released her at once. They stood close for a breath, smiling with an astonishment that made them seem younger than either had felt in years. Edith lowered her hand, but did not step away immediately. Tomorrow, I remain Miss Selwyn. Yes, there'll be no announcement. No announcement. No proposal outside the hall because the room believes me. No proposal anywhere until you've had time to decide whether you want one. The answer pleased her more than any declaration of certainty. Good. Christopher retrieved his cane, and I'll remain the man who waits until you choose otherwise. Edith's smile returned. You may find waiting uncomfortable. I've survived London dinners. I'm prepared for hardship. She laughed then, softly, but without restraint. Mrs. K looked up from her mending and allowed herself a discreet smile before returning to her work. Lady Anne's eyes shone, though she said nothing. Christopher offered Edith no arm as they walked back toward the house. They moved side by side at the pace both had learned, their sleeves brushing once without design. At the French doors, he paused. I'll see you at St. Martin's Hall. You'll see me before the room sees the evidence. I already have. He left with his cane visible and his promise intact. Edith remained in the garden for 1 moment longer, the folded speaking order warm in her hand. Love had not solved the inquiry. It had not restored her wages, cleared her name, or stopped 180 defective pairs from reaching Long Acre. It had done something quieter and, to her, more astonishing. It had arrived before victory and asked nothing from it. At 10 o'clock on the 3rd of June, St. Martin's Hall in Long Acre held 180 women beneath its high windows, along with subscribers, committee members, trade witnesses, and enough curious members of society to turn justice into spectacle if Edith allowed it. Rows of black shoes waited on long tables, each pair polished, ribboned, and marked for distribution. Edith stood beside Mr. Noakes near the front platform. The broken C-17 shoes remained locked in his case until the moment of formal transfer. The sealed S-17 display pair rested in a separate box. Mrs. Vale, Mrs. Green, and Mary Holt waited together near Mrs. K and Lady Anne. Ada sat with her hands clasped around a plain reticule. Mr. Ellis stood near the wall with his personal day book under his arm. Victor occupied the committee table as though authority were a chair no one could remove from beneath him. Teresa wore pale blue and the expression of a woman certain that elegance could still defeat evidence. Before the first recipient was called forward, Edith raised her voice. The distribution must stop until these shoes are examined. Victor stood. You have no office here, Miss Selwyn. Christopher rose from the first row, his cane visible at his side. She has the floor by committee invitation. The hall quieted. He moved to the platform without haste, placed one hand on the lectern, and looked not at Victor, but at the women waiting for shoes. I am the principal patron of this subscription, he said. My letters brought subscribers. My money supported its work. My signature appeared on reports that described complaints as negligible. I did not order inferior shoes, remove complaint tags, or withhold wages. But my name made this fund easier to trust, and my inattention made those who complained harder to believe. A stir moved through the hall. Christopher did not retreat from it. Lady Caroline Darlington's memory will not be defended by concealing harm done beneath it. My responsibility is not equal to every other person's, but it is real, and I acknowledge it before any accusation is answered. He stepped back. He did not look toward Edith for reward. He simply gave her the room. Mr. Noakes opened his case before 2 witnesses, read the custody entry aloud, and transferred the C-17 shoes temporarily to Edith. She signed beneath his name. The pair was unchanged. The left sole remained split. The right heel leaned inward, and the compressed filling showed through the break. Edith placed them on a plain white cloth. No velvet, no ribbon, no ornament to make suffering attractive. These were issued to me from returned fund stock, she said. They failed beneath me at Rotham House. I was accused of causing the damage myself. Mr. Noakes brought forward the S-17 box. The seals were inspected, recorded, and broken in view of the room. Miss Tukes placed the sound display pair beside Edith's broken shoes. Same crest, same size number. Nearly identical upper leather, different construction. He opened the already damaged C-17 sole without extending the tier. Compressed paper, scrap filling, thin split leather, a heel built to look straight before wear. Then he pressed the S-17 sole and showed the closer stitching and solid leather midsole. This pair was made to walk. That pair was made to pass inspection. Mrs. Vale spoke first. Her sole had opened on Commercial Street after rain. Mrs. Green described walking half a mile in her stockings, because her heel would no longer bear weight. Mary Holt told the hall that she had fallen, lost a day's wages, and feared another complaint would remove her from future relief. Each woman carried her own failed pair. None had transferred possession before that morning. Mr. Tukes examined the visible wear and confirmed the same pattern. Ada came forward next. Her voice shook, but it did not fail. Lady Teresa ordered me to remove blue-edged complaint tags from the review tray. She told me to hide returned shoes and bring sound S pairs whenever inspections were expected. Mr. Noakes opened the separate packet received from Ada on the 27th of May. He did not read the recipients' names aloud. He showed the blue edges, the dates, and the repeated descriptions of loosened soles and collapsing heels. Teresa rose. A frightened maid will say anything when a duke arranges her future. Christopher remained silent as Edith had required. Ada answered for herself. His Grace didn't hire me. Mr. Noakes arranged independent advice. I kept the tags before I knew he would help me. Mr. Ellis then opened his own daybook. The original had remained in his possession until that moment. He showed the entries for S, meaning show, and C, meaning common. He read the quantities and delivery dates. Mr. Noakes followed with the genuine invoices, each billing the entire stock as stout leather walking shoes. The final remittance showed a supplier allowance directed, by Victor's instruction, to a creditor holding an overdue Rotham carriage note. Victor's face hardened. Commercial allowances are not theft. They become evidence of motive when inferior goods are billed at the better grade, Mr. Noakes replied. Teresa turned toward Edith. None of this proves she didn't weaken her own pair for effect. Mr. Tukes lifted the broken left shoe. The wear does. The internal layers collapsed under damp and weight. The separation follows the weakened construction. A deliberate cut would show a different edge and would not produce the same compression found in the recipient's shoes. Victor pushed back his chair. These women received footwear without charge. Whatever the workmanship, gratitude should have restrained this public ingratitude. Edith faced him across the white cloth. Gratitude is not consent to danger. The words carried farther than anger. One of the waiting women began to applaud, then stopped when Edith raised her hand. She did not need applause. She needed remedy. The committee chair called for motions. By clear vote, the current contract was cancelled. Victor was removed as treasurer. Teresa was removed as patroness. An independent audit and recovery solicitor would be appointed, and a direct complaint process would include recipient representatives. Mr. Noakes served Victor with formal notice seeking civil recovery. No one pretended a final judgment could be achieved in a morning. Under advice, Victor signed an undertaking not to dispose of listed personal securities while the matter proceeded. Christopher pledged funds for sound emergency replacements without waiving Victor's liability. Edith then asked that the women already waiting be fitted before any subscriber attended another gala. That motion passed too. Teresa was given a choice between signing a correction circular to every subscriber who had received Victor's accusation, or allowing the full minutes to be published without delay. Her hand trembled once as she signed. By the time the hall emptied, Victor had lost his London charitable offices and announced that he would withdraw to the Wrotham country seat. His title remained, so did Teresa's. Society could not erase rank, but it could close doors once opened by reputation. The reconstituted committee offered Edith a paid position as superintendent of fittings and complaints. She accepted only after the wages, authority, reporting line, and right to record recipient objections were written into the minutes. Mr. Noakes received the C-17 shoes back from her under witnessed entry and locked them again in his case. Christopher waited until every transfer was complete. Then he held out his hand. Edith looked at it, then at him. Before the same class that had watched her humiliation, she placed her hand in his freely. Outside the hall, Longacre shone beneath a recent shower. Christopher did not offer a carriage or a promise disguised as rescue. He stood beside her with his cane and asked, "May I court you without hiding you from your work or your work from me?" Edith let the question rest between them long enough to make the answer wholly hers. "Yes," she said, "but you must learn my walking pace." His smile was quiet and unguarded. "I believe I've already begun." Together they stepped onto the wet pavement, not yet engaged, not yet beyond difficulty, but no longer required to pretend that love and truth belonged on separate roads. By the 4th of June, the new committee had begun work before London society had finished repeating the scandal. Edith entered the temporary fitting rooms in Bloomsbury as superintendent of fittings and complaints, her authority written into the minutes and her wages fixed by date rather than favor. Every recipient now received a numbered complaint tag that could be carried directly to an independent clerk. A sealed sample pair from each batch remained under witnessed custody. Quarterly inspections required a cordwainer, a committee representative, and at least one woman who had worn the shoes. No subscriber attended a gala until the women waiting for relief had been fitted first. Edith insisted upon every safeguard, because she knew how easily sympathy became ceremony when no one recorded what followed. Ada Broom accepted a position with a respectable widowed patroness unconnected to Cranmore House. Mr. Ellis received the wages the contractor had withheld, along with a written character that described his conduct truthfully. Victor Croxley withdrew to the Wrotham country seat while repayment proceeded through the sale of his London carriage team and a portion of his personal securities. The civil recovery remained active, but no one pretended that one public vote had completed the law. Teresa retained her courtesy title, yet lost the patronage and invitations that had made her cruelty fashionable. Her correction circular reached every subscriber who had received the accusation against Edith. It stated, in Teresa's own signed hand, that no evidence proved Miss Selwyn had damaged charitable property, and that the defective shoes had been supplied under a concealed two-grade arrangement. The language was reluctant. The truth did not require enthusiasm. Christopher began his courtship with the same patience he had learned at the inquiry. He called in the mornings with Lady Anne. He walked with Edith under Mrs. K's eye. He attended committee visits when invited and remained away when his presence might silence a recipient. At dinner, he asked about her work before speaking of his own affairs. He brought no jewels, no carriage, and no costly token that might make gratitude difficult to separate from affection. He used his cane whenever he needed it. Some days he moved easily. On damp mornings, his left leg stiffened and his pace slowed. Edith did not arrange her whole life around the injury, and Christopher did not make endurance a performance. They chose a pace that belonged to both of them. Once, when a committee meeting ran late and he waited outside beneath an awning, she said, "You could have sent word." He answered, "I could have. I wanted to walk home with you." She took his arm because she wished to, not because either of them needed rescuing. Their disagreements proved as important as their tenderness. When Christopher suggested adding a ducal representative to every inspection, Edith told him the rule would make ordinary women fear the process. He listened, withdrew the proposal, and helped create a rotating independent panel instead. When Edith worked 3 evenings without rest, he did not order her home. He asked whether the work required her or whether habit had persuaded her no one else could be trusted. She disliked the question, then admitted he was right. By July, love had become visible not through spectacle, but through repeated choices that survived inconvenience. Their marriage settlement was negotiated by separate solicitors. Edith's wages and savings remained under her separate use. A trust protected future personal income. Nothing in the settlement gave Christopher authority over her professional position, or permitted the subscription to become a branch of the Cranmore household. He accepted every provision without argument. "I'm marrying you," he told her, "not absorbing you." On the 20th of July, after the weeks of proper courtship that followed the hearing, Christopher asked Edith to walk with him in the quiet courtyard behind the new fitting rooms. Mrs. K remained near the open office door. The paving stones were warm beneath the afternoon sun, and the scent of leather and clean paste drifted from the workrooms. Christopher stood before Edith with his cane in one hand. He did not kneel, because the movement would have caused pain and because neither of them needed discomfort turned into romance. "I don't ask you to leave this work for my house," he said. "I ask whether we may make a life large enough for both." Edith looked at the man who had first seen her shame, then learned not to make seeing the same as possessing. "I love you," she said. "Yes." His smile broke slowly across his face. He asked, "May I kiss you?" She answered, "You may," and stepped close enough to make the choice unmistakably hers. The banns were read according to custom. On the 20th of August, they were married at St. George's, Hanover Square, with Lady Anne and Mrs. K beside Edith, and no attempt to turn the ceremony into a triumph over Teresa. Ada attended from the pews. Mr. Ellis stood near the rear in a clean, dark coat. Christopher used his cane openly as they left the church. Edith became Duchess of Cranmore, but she did not cease to be superintendent. 3 weeks later, on the 7th of September, rain fell over London when the permanent fitting rooms reopened. The morning began with recipients, not patrons. Women sat on plain chairs while trained fitters measured their feet and recorded every concern. Edith moved through the room in a simple dark gown and a new pair of stout black shoes purchased with the first wages from her position. Near noon, Mr. Noakes arrived carrying the cloth bag that had remained in his custody after St. Martin's Hall. He read the return entry aloud. Edith signed. He signed beneath her. The broken C-17 shoes passed back into her possession. The left sole was still split. The right heel still leaned inward. The compressed filling remained visible. Nothing had been repaired, disguised, or restored. Edith carried them to a plain oak cupboard in her office and placed them beside a dated evidence label. She did not put them beneath glass. She had no wish to make private suffering another exhibition for fashionable visitors. When she closed the cupboard, Christopher stood in the doorway with rein on his shoulders and his cane in his right hand. "Are you ready?" he asked. Edith looked down at the new shoes on her feet. The soles were sound, but that was no longer the only difference. She had bought them with wages no one could withhold in exchange for silence. "I am." Christopher opened his left hand. Edith crossed the room, placed her hand in his, then drew him toward her instead of toward the door. "You're forgetting something," she said. "Am I?" "You are." She rose onto her toes and kissed him. The kiss was warm, deliberate, and familiar now, though it still carried the wonder of being freely chosen. Christopher's hand settled at her waist only after she leaned into him. When she drew back, his forehead rested briefly against hers. "I love you," he said. "I love you too." They stepped outside together. Rain darkened the pavement and gathered along the curb. Christopher's cane touched the stones in steady rhythm. Edith's new soles held firm. They did not hurry. Behind them, the broken shoes remained exactly as truth had found them. Ahead, 2 lines of footprints continued side by side across the wet London street. The first shoes had taught Edith how quietly a woman could be made to suffer. The next carried her forward, and Christopher kept pace beside her.